The dark night of the soul is an experience that we have when we experience this loss of meaning. It is when we encounter a problem or a defeat and we sink down and our projections no longer hold. How we think of the world is destroyed, and now we are left to face ourselves. And that often leads us into a confrontation with the shadow, which is the other aspects of ourselves that we weren't previously paying attention to. So the dark night of the soul might come to us through many different ways. It could be a loss of a major relationship. It could be a loss or a change of career. It could be failures within your friendships or your family. It could be a complete restructuring of your belief system. It could be encountering different philosophies, different faiths, or non-faith. It could be a whole range of different defeats, of different things that bring us down into the depths, into a kind of depression. But this depression is something that is experienced as if it is a loss of meaning, a loss of the things that formerly gave us some sense of meaning or idea or framework for understanding ourselves and the world. For example, if you're in a relationship and that relationship ends, now that relationship that formerly contained an aspect of your identity has now collapsed. So a part of your identity of how you see yourself as being in a particular relationship and seeing that other person in a particular way and seeing yourself in a particular way has collapsed and is gone. The same thing can happen if you leave church, for example. Your faith, the way you live, the way you see and structure the world changes as you've left that way of living, that way of believing and seeing the world. The same happens if you leave a particular career and you quit what you're doing, or you get fired, or something happens and you have to begin to change your work. Because the way you conceived yourself as acting in the world, the thing that gave you meaning and purpose to your everyday tasks, is now taken away from you. So there's many different ways one can fall into this dark night of the soul. But what it mainly entails is a loss of meaning. But what I want to describe to you today is how Jung looks at this and analyzes this, and then how Jung talks about these alchemical processes that these alchemists explored in connection to this idea of the dark night of the soul, which is the beginning of this process of individuation. It's the beginning stages of this alchemical process of becoming whole and realizing the self and completing the journey that we're on archetypally, psychologically, and in life. And so the dark night of the soul is a major experience that one encounters. And it can be triggered, as I said, by many different situations in life. But it comes at this point of losing our meaning in life. Now, why is that? Well, Jung describes it as this process where the projections that we have, that we put on the world, that we project onto the world, are pulled back. That is what the dark night of the soul is. It's when our projections are pulled back from the world or from the object, right? And so we can see it in those examples I gave. Say you're in a relationship, but this can apply in many other ways. But let's say you're in a relationship. and you view that person in a particular way. You project onto them aspects of who you think they are. Let's say you're in a relationship that has quite a lot of conflict in it. You're projecting something negative onto them, and you might not fully see clearly how you've been acting in this relationship. Now, when that relationship ends, you have time to reflect and you realize, hey, actually, I was projecting. What I thought I saw in that person was not actually there. It was just a part of who I was. I was living in a fantasy. I was living in a delusion. I was fighting with myself. I was seeking after myself. I was doing things, but really it was a part of myself. Now, that is a realization of the projection that is now collapsed, which gives us an understanding of the shadow. So this is what happens when the projections that you put out onto the world are pulled back. You then encounter the shadow. You encounter your shadow, right? Because you are no longer thinking that thing that you're projecting outside onto the world is separate to you or something other. You now, in pulling back the projections from the world back into yourself, you realize this is actually an aspect of myself. And this is what the dark night of the soul is, because it is a loss of meaning, which means you've pulled back the projection, or you've pulled back the meaning that you were projecting onto the world that you were living in. So say you were going to church and you have a loss of faith, or you have a loss of the meaning of that particular institution. You were thinking these people were great, these people are holy, but you were projecting onto them an aspect of yourself, and you didn't realize they were just stealing your money or something like that. I'm just making a fictional, scenario here, but this can happen in many different ways. Say you went to some scammer type church. I don't know. This is so many different things happen. And then you realize, hey, this is corrupt. This is not really what I thought it was. These people are lying to me. They're hyping up all these miracles or something, or they're telling me something false about the history of this and that. And now I realize that was wrong, and I have a collapse of meaning. But I was projecting that meaning onto it, and that's why it can collapse. And then and there now in this situation, your shadow is revealed, which is your doubts that you always had about this faith or belief you had, right? And so that is the structure of what happens here. It's a pulling back of the projections, which leads to an uncovering and an encountering with the shadow. Now, what happens in this moment of encountering the shadow? Well, in the initial stages, it comes with a lot of confusion. That's why the dark night of the soul is said to be something that comes with confusion. And Jung shows that the alchemists have their equivalent to the dark night of the soul is called the nigredo, or it's called the chaos, the massa confusa, or massa confusa. So the massa confusa, it is something that is confusing. It's a confusing state because you've encountered the shadow. Now, why is that? Let me explain it to you here. It is because the shadow presents to the conscious mind the opposite standpoint, right? So let's go back to that idea with this relationship. If you broke up a relationship, right? You thought you were acting you thought you were the good guy, but then you realized, oh no, actually, when I reflect upon it, I did do some bad things. And I'm actually now realizing my shadow side, the bad things I did in that relationship, right? But now you're put in a state of confusion because you don't know if you're good or bad, because you still know consciously you did good things, right? But you also did some bad things according to how how you determine good and bad within this situation. And so what happens is this confusion of who you are, because there's a clash between your conscious perception of yourself and your unconscious perception of yourself, which is your shadow, right? And the shadow, you see, is an opposite standpoint to what you think is your morality. So it threatens your morality in a sense. And you say, oh, I am not only this moral being that I see consciously, that I think of myself and my ego, but now I can also see I'm actually this immoral being according to this moral standard that I've set for myself. You see? So it's all, dependent on your particular constitution and how you structure these things, right? But it's a counterbalance. So that's how, according to Jung, the unconscious works. For every action you have, there is a counter reaction in the unconscious, basically, right? And so it's a counterweight. So when you realize I am both this and that, a confusion sets in, and you become kind of disconnected to the outside world and to the inner world, or what we would call God, right? Or the self, the archetype of the self, because the shadow at this point is blocking you. It is something to overcome at this point. And so this is the experience of the dark night of the soul, or what the alchemists call the nigredo, the chaos. You are deep in chaos. Nothing's making sense. You don't know which way is up and down, where I should go, how I should feel. This is the experience you are put into, this chaotic experience after some defeat in your life, right? Now, Jung does some interesting things here, and he shows that the alchemists had a kind of answer for this, or that this was a part of a bigger process. So we could leave it at that, and that would be interesting, that you encounter your shadow and you integrate your knowledge from there, right? That sounds great. But let's go further deeper into the psychological interpretation of these alchemical understandings that Jung is talking about here. So the first kind of stage is that dark night of the soul, or the encounter with the shadow, right? But this is linked to this other interesting process. And this process is what the alchemists call the unio mentalis, which is basically a union between the soul and the spirit, right? And so this is going to sound a little confusing until I flesh out the dynamics of what's going on here psychologically. So you remember how we pulled back the projections from the world, and that led to a collapse of meaning, which led to an observation and a confrontation with our shadow, with the unconscious. Well, that process is, in effect, a pulling back of the soul. This is how the alchemists talk about it. It's a pulling back of the soul from the body. So there's this idea that the soul in this state of the nigredo is bound up with the dark elements of the body. Right? Now let me flesh that idea out a little bit so you understand it, and then we'll understand its psychological significance. So Jung is talking about these alchemists. And it's important to understand these alchemists were also Christian. So they believed in the Christian understanding of these things. So to have an understanding of the Christian background will help us understand what's going on here. What psychological implication is going on from all this seemingly confusing material? Well, we can see that in Christianity, there's the idea of the inherent sin, right? So that the body is basically born into this inherent sinfulness, right? So there's an aspect of the body that is dark or corrupt. And so this state of the nigredo is when the soul is tangled up with this corrupted body, right? So that's the picture that we get from Christianity, and that is described through these alchemical processes. So that is the state of the nigredo. That is that massa confusa, right? So now I'm going to try to bring it together so you understand it. The soul, Jung describes, is equated to eros, to feeling, and the spirit is equated to reason or logos, right? And so that's at least one analogy that Jung gives later on in these passages. And so that helps us understand that in that sense, it's that our feelings are caught up in the body. Or another way to put it is, we are caught up in some affective type of fantasy or delusion about the world. And that's why when we pull back those delusions, our projections, what we experience is basically a separation of the soul or our feelings from the body or the world, right? And you see, that's what leads to the depression. We were living happily in what's called the soul, or a projection of our mind onto the world. We were happily living in that delusion because it was a feeling we were really guided by. That's not rational. That's some feeling. That's some archetypal type of experience that we're living in, right? When we separate that from the world and we realize, oh, wait a second, the world is different to this delusion I'm living in, that is like the spirit uncovering, the spirit saving the soul from the body, right? And that's how it's seen in Christianity. But psychologically, that means it is our rationality, our understanding of the spirit of truth, let's say, is saving us. Our logos is helping our eros disconnect from a corrupted body. That is the alchemical process, right? And so it could be simply seen in psychology as a rational position which destroys all our fantasies. And we understand, oh, that's really what was going on. See, what is thinking? Thinking enables you to understand what something is. That's how Jung describes it. Thinking enables you to judge and understand what something is and how it works and operates, right? And so let's say you were living in some fantasy according to your feeling, and you thought something of the world, but your fantasy feelings were caught up and corrupted in the world itself, or in what is here what's called a corrupt body. So it's not just your body, your physical body, but it is the world at large, right? It's so if you're living in a fantasy delusion, that's equivalent in this analogy as the soul is embedded in a corrupt body. And so the spirit helps deliver the soul from the corrupt body, just as thinking correctly and understanding objectively through your thinking, through your rationality, how things operate. You go, oh man, I was really an idiot in that relationship. Or, oh, of course that job didn't work out. I understand how that job works now because I'm using my rationality. That's what's functioning. Or there was a psychopath there and they were there dominating that area. And of course I felt bad. So you basically sober up. You come to a sobering experience of the reality of the situation using your thinking. And your thinking basically saves your feeling that was tangled up in the situation you found yourself in, whether it be the relationship, the job, the belief system, whatever collapse of meaning you have, right? And so this is that interesting thing. So this is how this process happens. But then what happens is the alchemists have this idea of what I described earlier of the unio mentalis, which is the definition of the unio mentalis is when the soul and the spirit combine together as one to overcome the body, right? And so psychologically, we can take that as our thinking and feeling coming together in order to smash and overcome any delusions or projections we are putting onto the world, right? Because we now have an understanding of what things are and how we feel about them. And what that does is that produces a great understanding of ourselves. And that is a key component to the unio mentalis, is that the unio mentalis, which is the spirit and soul coming together, our thinking and feeling coming together, helps us overcome the body, helps us overcome this situation we're entangled up in, right? And so what you want is the unification of your thinking and feeling, right? And I've had many dreams about this in my own experience, right? I shared one before in the previous video where I dreamed that a woman came out of the water. She held my hand and she said, "Take off the amulet of self-discipline, for it's manifesting rigidly on you." And then she said, "The man rules upstairs, but give me permission and I'll go up there and change things." And I gave her permission. I said, "Yes, you can go up there." And then so she went up there. It was all colorful, like a rainbow almost or something. And she changed something. And after that experience, I had a more integration of my feelings with my thinking. And I've had many other dreams too that involve very similar things like that clearly articulate the reconciliation of opposites, especially thinking and feeling. And so in Jung's analysis of alchemy, he sees the psychological significance of this alchemical process. And this alchemical process, the first step, this is just the first step. It involves what I just said, the unio mentalis, thinking and feeling coming together to overcome the body, specifically the corruption of the body. And so you see, the body is sinful, or the body is seen as this, like I said, in Christianity, there's this idea that we're all born into sin. Now, in that sense, in that religious sense, and in this alchemical sense, that means there is some type of truth or idea that's hidden in the body. And that's also hints at the idea of now, when I pull back the projections, I can see the truth, or I can see the truth hidden in the shadow or the corrupt side of the body, right? And so it's something interesting like that, right? And so I thought I would describe this process before I read out any of actually Jung's quotes on it, so you can understand it clearly and how it relates to your life and the psychological significance of it. But I can back up everything I'm saying with a quote from Jung, right? And I might do that in some cases here and there. But let me finish this process. So that's the first element. But then what happens is that's just the first stage. The first stage is self-realization. And if you were stuck, if you were in a situation right now, either in a relationship, with work, or with, something in your belief system, because like I've experienced all of this. I've experienced it with relationships. I've had many different relationships. I've experienced the death and resurrection that comes through these experiences. I've experienced the personality development that comes through going through these different things, right? In other words, I have a great understanding of myself through all these experiences, through having these dark experiences of the failure of different relationships, of the collapse of different employment and work, which is your identity, and how you relate to the world. A collapse of my personal belief system and a change of my understanding of Christianity and belief, right? I've had collapses with different family members and with friends, a breaking away of different friendships that were extremely close, but now are non-existent. So I've experienced lots of different transformations, let's say, right? But how do you actually make sure you make the next step? Well, what happens is the unio mentalis, which is the combination of the spirit and the soul, or thinking and feeling in this example, it gives you self-knowledge. And that is actually what you need to know. See, that's not what you think you need to know. You want me to give you some other answer. But the answer really is self-knowledge. Now you might be, well, how, what do you mean? Well, in any situation you find yourself in, all those situations I just listed that I went through, what makes me able not to fall back into them is knowledge of myself. For example, with the past relationships I was in, the reason why it didn't work was some failing in understanding myself or the other person, right? And so if I understood myself, if I had more self-knowledge at that point, I wouldn't have acted in a particular way, or I may have not even entered into that kind of relationship with that kind of person. Because I know myself so well, I know what I fit into. I know what is good for me. Because that is what feeling is. Having a good understanding and connection with your feelings is understanding what is actually good for you as a person, right? And if I have better thinking, I understand what is actually happening, how people are operating, what actions, words, thoughts, feelings are actually proceeding and operating in that relationship, right? In other words, you understand the patterns of how you function. You get self-knowledge through the combination of your thinking and feeling. You understand yourself very well, and you have insights on all sides of this equation of how you feel and how you were lacking and you didn't know that you felt this way, but now you do, or how you think you didn't understand that because you couldn't see it and how it worked, but now you understand how it works and you understand the logic of the situation. All on both sides of the aisle, these revelations, let's say, these insights are coming to you. You have great self-knowledge when you experience the unio mentalis, because you are integrating these fundamental aspects of yourself together, and you're experiencing this transformation. A real change happens through this process. This is not just some theoretical thing. This is an actual experience that you go through. Yes, you see it in dreams and stuff like that, but it actually produces a tangible, existential result in your life. And that is the significant element of this. And out of this experience of the thinking and feeling come together, and a great expansion of self-awareness comes from this. Out of that experience, you understand more about yourself. And that's the whole idea of understanding the shadow, right? It's actually to understand more of yourself. It's not just, some people think of it just as implementing the dark side. Mostly it can be like that, but it's not necessarily like that, right? So it's not necessarily just you're implementing more of your aggression and making it work for you. That could be part of it. That could be for you, but it's more so about the principle of the things that you've left out. So a criminal who is by their natural nature seems to be very aggressive, right? Their shadow might be being more kind, being kind of more gentle, right? So they might integrate this gentleness that they didn't know they had because they always associated in their ego is this rough and tough tumble man. And maybe now they're actually integrating some gentleness into their life and they go, yeah, maybe actually I am a little bit gentle as well and I can be like that, right? You see? So it's not just about darkness, dark, bad things. You know, the darkness means ignorance. It means things you didn't know about yourself. So the darkness can actually be something quite positive and good, right? You might think you're not very competent at something and you have this problem, oh, I'm not good at anything, right? But then you realize, actually, I am good at things and it was just hidden in my shadow, right? So my delusion that I was living in, that I wasn't actually good at what I was doing at work or whatever, was wrong. And now that delusion is shattered and now I understand, wow, I actually am good at this. And, you know, I was just hiding it from myself for whatever reason, right? Because I was scared to praise myself. Whatever, we don't need to go into the specifics, but these are all examples so you can hold on to and try to apply this knowledge to your life, right? That's the purpose of me giving you examples. I'm trying to give you the theory. I'm trying to give you the examples, you know, and articulate it in such a way that you can hold on to it and see how it operates in your own life. That's what the point of this is, right? Otherwise, there's no point to these videos at all. This is here to help you gain insight into these processes and insight into what Jung is talking about. Okay, so what happens then with this process is you have an integration of your thinking and feeling. That gives you immense insight, but that is only the first step. That Jung says this is only the first step, basically, of the alchemical process. Because what that is it's given you insight. But what has that done? That has done, in this alchemical language, it is taken the soul out of the body, right? The spirit has taken the soul out of the body, and the spirit and soul have become the unio mentalis. But now the body is left lifeless. The body's left without any life, right? Like if you think of just the Christian idea of a soul living a body, and now the body, what does it do? It's got no life, because what gave the body life was the soul, right? And so what happens here now is we move to the second stage. And what is the second stage? The second stage is that you need to actually integrate, I guess, a spirit-filled soul back into the body, right? Like a redeemed body. That's basically what we want. And so we can see that in the Christian imagery. That's what they tried to do, right? With the resurrection of Jesus and so forth, right? But Jung talks about how evidently there seems to be a failure there, because we still are, even though that whole grand event happened with Christianity, we still seem to, even though Christ has come and risen and everything, we're still in this state where we live, even after that event, we still live in this state where we are trapped in this kind of corrupted body, right? And so that's why the alchemists had need to do these things, right? They believed in Christianity, but they believed that, you know, that something was wrong. So they were doing these alchemical processes that Jung describes here. And so the next step is to integrate, to integrate those insights that you get from the self-knowledge that you get from the integration of your thinking and feeling, right? You're meant to integrate those insights into actuality. You're meant to actually live it now, right? That is what it means to now have this unio mentalis now come back in union with the body, right? That's what it means. So now we actually have to bring this insight into actuality. Otherwise, it just remains in this potential state. You have this potential because you have this insight of who you are. In other words, you've learned from all the experiences. Like I said, I went through all these different experiences in my life. I've learned from every single one of them something about myself. But if I fail to implement that insight in my next relationship, or the next time I go into a job, or in the next time I try to search and understand and construct my belief system, right? Or the next time I do whatever, then I fail to implement the wisdom that I could have learned, that I could have lived out in real life in actuality. I fail to unite the spirit-filled soul back into the body. You see? That is the process that needs to happen. And so I think that basically describes what needs to happen, right? That's the second element. And Jung basically talks about how these alchemists kind of were stuck there. They were stuck there trying to do this because they were also stuck in the conceptions they had within Christianity, right? And they didn't know. That's why they were looking at the idea of the elixir of life, for example, in alchemy. They thought that the elixir of life could at least maybe restore them back to the biblical years, because in the Bible, people lived for hundreds of thousands of years, right? In the Old Testament. So they were looking for that, or maybe eternal life. Maybe the elixir could provide them with eternal life. Why? Because it's a chemical kind of equation, some type of secret they were trying to uncover that would enable the redemption of the body, right? That would enable the spirit and the soul to be reunited back with the body. And so that's basically what they were looking for. And Jung describes this process as the process of individuation, because we don't just individuate in our minds, right? We individuate in actuality by actually living life. So the first stage is incomplete. The first stage is the unio mentalis. That can happen intrapsychically, meaning that can happen in yourself. But the second stage of implementing that into the body, or what Jung says basically is living out wisdom, right? To actually live out the wisdom is to implement these insights into actuality, into your life. So in the dark night of the soul, you experience this state of meaninglessness, this collapse of your beliefs, and you might be confused for a while. But if you sit through that process and try not to get caught back up in the delusions you were in, and try to pay attention to the knowledge of yourself that you can learn through this process of your projections, of your shadow, of what the unconscious is bringing to you, trying to show you. If you can learn more about that, then what that does is it gives you more knowledge of yourself, right? And then that gives you an ability to now apply wisdom to the world, because you know not only how to do things through thinking through them, or you not only know how to rely on how you feel about things, but you can combine them together to understand how you feel, what things are in the world, and you can walk that middle road, which is the road of wisdom. All right, so you're not living out some weird, obscured, point of view of something. You're living out more of a realistic understanding of what's going on, right? Through an understanding of who you really are in many ways, and I think that's basically what this process is all about. Along the road to individuation, of becoming yourself or self-actualization, right? Of meeting your full potential. And you do that as you bring light into the darkness in your own self and life. And that helps you not just sitting in your living room, that helps you actually in the real world, doing real tangible things, right? It helps you actually go back out and have a great relationship. Go back out and actually achieve and do well in work and in life, because you understand how you function. You understand the patterns that you're in and why you're in them and how to get out of them and how to transform and how to change. Or at least it will show you what to address, what problems you do have that you have to watch out for, or what strengths you have that you have to lean into and move into. It unveils a deep understanding of yourself, right? And so if you understand yourself really well, you're going to know what to do in any given situation, at least as far as you'll know how to respond to what's going on, right? Because you understand your capabilities, you understand your weaknesses, you understand what you can do, how you move, how you act, how you function, the patterns, what hooks, what people can hook into you, So when you have an understanding of it, it's harder for you to fail, really, because you've learned from the past, but you've learned in a very unique way about yourself. And so let's move on here. Just the very end of this is basically Jung talks about the third and final stage that the alchemists talk about. And it's basically not only do you become kind of the ultimate individuated man, which is kind of like the second stage, which is individuation, right? Where the spirit and soul joins back into the body and you become this kind of individuated person. Not only do you become that, but according to these alchemists, the third stage is when you unite with God. you not only kind of individuate in this world, in this way, but in some other way, you complete this grander purpose beyond all this. And, I can't really understand what that means for our everyday life, because it seems so magnificent, right? But I guess in a sense, it gives you this meaning of the transcendent, this idea that what you're doing has some type of ultimate meaning beyond even what's going on here, and there's something about that thought that gives us this comfort. There's something about that seems even more ultimate than just you self-actualizing, in some physical space and time, and then nothing happens after that. Instead of that, it's you self-actualize in this space and time, and that somehow is significant to God. That is somehow significant to the archetype of the self. Because in Jung's writing here, it also describes how not only does the unio mentalis happen in you, but that also happens in the God image. So there is, in some sense, some connection between our life and activity and the grand experience or the image of God, right? So we are somehow involved in that experience. And so it's described as all in one and one in all. So whatever's happening in the micro is happening in the macro. And so in this sense, we get this sense of a relationship between our personality and the greater personality, or what's called the self, or the God image. And there is not only a transformation in ourself, but a transformation in the God image. And that actually is an aspect of ourself as well, what we come to know as the greater personality of ourself, right? That we're all kind of connected to. And so, you know, that is the more esoteric kind of side to all this, I guess. But in a sense, it gives you comfort that you're connected to some other grand experience, you know. And that's, for us personally, I guess that's the psychological significance of it. So I'm going to leave it at that. I mean, I could delve into the very specifics like I normally do. I quote Jung, and I've got a lot of quotes here, right? But I feel like I've just described it sufficiently enough. You know, and if I delved into the quotes, they get so kind of, you know, we're talking about this thing, then we're talking about that thing. So I might do a little bit I might find some relevant ones just to end it off here. Okay, so let me just end it off with a few little quotes from Jung, because I always like to show the source material to make you know that I've actually studied it. I actually am at least know what I'm talking about as far as you know, the quote that I'm presenting. And even if I don't know, it doesn't matter. At least I've presented the actual source material. You can go check it out for yourself, right? And so this quote is important, I think, because it brings us back to how this operates in our actual life, right? And so here's a quote from Jung. Psychologically, it would mean that the insight gained by the withdrawal of projections could not stand the clash with reality, and consequently, that its truth could not be realized in fact, at least not to the desired degree or in the desired way. Right? And so, close quote there, right? So, Jung there, that describes the idea of the problem of bringing this spirit-filled soul back into the body, you know, or the unio mentalis back into the body, that second equation, right? Because what that is when you're going out there and trying to actually substantiate these insights of yourself into the world, that is the hardest part. And Jung's saying here that this can fail when you pull back your projections and you clash with reality. If the truth about yourself and the truth about the reality of the world is too harsh for you and you cannot handle it, you're not going to be able to bring back the insights into reality. You're not going to bring back the combination of the soul and spirit back into the body. You're not going to be able to bring the self-knowledge you've learned and live out the actual wisdom in your life. You're not going to be able to substantiate that wisdom in your life because the clash with reality is so great. This clash with the understanding of the situation of yourself and the world has shocked you to your core that you can't handle it. That is what I imagine a lot of people experiencing. That is the meme of the doomer. The doomer meme is exactly that, right? The doomer meme basically is the dark night of the soul, right? That's the doomer, right? Because you're in this state of like this depression, but it's a particular type of depression, right? Where things seem meaningless, right? And so you don't want to you don't want to be like that. You want to be someone who can handle the truth. But I can't say whether or not you have the constitution to handle it, right? But you see, it comes back down to your ability to apply the truths that you learn of yourself in actuality to your life. So if you learn, okay, I'm like this. I understand this is an aspect of myself. I need to do something about this, right? You need to figure out some way to actualize on that insight so it actually produces a real change in your life. That's the important action to take from hearing this video. All right, so I thought that was interesting. There's a million other quotes I could read. Like, it's so awesome to read. I've really enjoyed reading. I felt like it gave me so much insight into Jung, into alchemy, even into Christianity, but also into the psychological process that we live out, right? Even I said, the Duma meme. Obviously, that's a meme because lots of people experience that lack of meaning. And this Dark Night of the Soul basically is that experience. But the important thing is, there's been here attempts to rectify that, right? And so I think this is very important for our lives psychologically, right? And so I'm going to end it here, but if you want me to, I don't know, release a part 2 on this and you want me to just to go to town with reading out all these quotes, I can do that if you want me to. Let me know. If you're happy just with my interpretation of it, which honestly, it took me ages to sit down and connect these ideas together, right? To connect the ideas of the Dark Night of the Soul was the experience that the alchemists called the Nigredo, which is what we commonly know as the confrontation of the shadow, which is coincided with the pulling back of the projections, which coincided with this idea of self-knowledge and individuation, and and coincided with thinking and feeling and the soul and the spirit and the body with the actualization of wisdom in life. You see, so it took me a while to get all those things together, but I hope I articulated it for you in the right way. That's my function here, is to try to articulate these things so you can have a really good conceptual understanding of it, but that it makes sense enough that you can, maybe you don't completely understand all of it, doesn't matter, but it makes sense enough that you can take it away and try to use it to solve some of the problems in your own life, because we all got problems, and that's what it's about. And a lot of this is about understanding ourselves. So it's a bit of a difficult topic because each individual has their individual experiences, right? And individual problems. And I'm talking to a broad audience, as in there's a group of many different individuals who might be experiencing all different things. But people contact me in the comments all the time about all different things. So you're not alone. Like about everything, about relationships, about work, about how they feel in life, about their dreams and trying to understand their dreams, which means they're trying to understand themselves, you see, and trying to understand different concepts in life. And so, we're all in this together. I'm doing the same thing. That's why I'm reading this, because I find it highly enjoyable. And I think that it really does tap into something really deep in the structure of our personality, which is actually who we really are and how we function, right? And so I want all of our personalities to kind of continue on this process of development. And that's why we're doing this. And I just think it's highly interesting. And so I'll leave with this last quote from Jung: "Where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling." And every time I hear that, it really fills me full of this numinous energy, because I think that is really interesting. Where wisdom reigns, there's no conflict between thinking and feeling, right? And so I just want you to lean into that quote, and maybe that will help you find the answer to the particular situation that you're in, right? And so thanks for listening. And hey, if you want to support this channel, then I do have a Patreon. I'd really appreciate if you do support the channel, because it's good for this to be like a financially viable endeavor. And at the moment, it's not. I have to pay more for subscriptions and different things, editing software, than I actually earn from the channel. So if you can donate, that would be great. The link is in the description. And if you want to work with me one-on-one, doing some coaching, then I've got an email in the description as well. So thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.